often call myself the translator because legal professionals are not always inherently tech savvy.
I think that word you use there, optimize, that often is mentioned by operators, right?
When you talk about scaling, there are a few different areas to scale. The mindset on AI does vary quite a bit depending on the firm.
One of my favorite things to say is leaning into the strengths that you have, and you know what your strengths are, right?
As an entrepreneur, it's important to recognize that you get out of it what you put into it.
Welcome to the podcast From Cold to Close. My name is Saeed and I'm the founder here at SRC Growth Partner, a growth company that works with professional services firms from around the world to help them increase their revenue and profitability by acquiring new clients. My guest today is Melissa Hansel, founder of Outlook Advisory Group and a law firm operations expert who's helped firms scale from startup and beyond. With her MIT technical background and deep organizational experience, Melissa has become the rare professional who can speak both languages, translating between technical teams and business leadership to drive real growth. She's worked as COO across firms of all sizes and has a track record of helping smaller firms double and triple their revenue while maintaining their culture. From AI implementation to pricing strategy to culture development, Melissa brings a practical, results-driven approach to professional services growth. Today, we're exploring her insights on scaling operations, implementing technology effectively, and building sustainable growth in professional services. Melissa, great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, no, I always find it really interesting. Operations is always a very interesting topic in general, I find, and that's primarily because it's a tough one to do, right? And with every single facet of business, and I always put it into three separate buckets, right? You got sales, you got marketing, and then you got operations, right? And then I guess a separate bucket would be recruitment, but that falls under operations. But BizOps is quite an interesting area because there's so many things that can happen in the business and so many things that need to be taken into consideration. So before we dive into that topic, I guess, are you able to share a little bit more about your background to our viewers and listeners who may not know who you are?
Yes, absolutely. And I've sort of grown up in the law firm world as an operations professional, and I am a law firm chief operating officer turned also consultant, and giving me the ability to really help more firms as well on a fractional or an advisory basis, because I find that operations is really broad and sometimes it doesn't have as much that you can identify, like marketing, for instance, in terms of what are the measures of success. And so, I operate in the area of margins and revenue growth and technology optimization and cultural optimization, and all of those things seem very separate, but they're all tied together under the operations umbrella. And, I love it because every day is different. And whether I'm helping a firm with an HR problem, or I am optimizing their tech stack, or talking with them about their strategic plan and their business planning and growth, those are all just, to me, very interesting areas that allow the firm to operate efficiently, optimize, and really grow.
Yeah, I think you raised some really interesting points there in terms surrounding operations. I think what's fascinating about you and your background is the combination of technical expertise you have from your MIT background and obviously working at larger law firms, AmLaw 100 firms, and practical law firm operations, right? How did you end up bridging that gap between technology and legal operations?
Yes. And it is sort of funny because I didn't grow up, thinking I was going to manage law firm operations. I sort of fell into it while I was in college at MIT. And even in speaking to their careers planning office, they said, wow, this is really interesting. We've never had anyone do this before. Let us know how it goes. And so, I kind of forged my own path in that sense to really bring these areas together. And, I often call myself the translator because legal professionals are not always inherently tech savvy. They're focused on the intricacies of the practice of law and sometimes the business side, sometimes not. And so, to bring sort of the visionary into practice and reality is part of my role and something that I really love doing. And speaking IT sometimes, talking with the programmers, coming up with a plan. I've built or sort of masterminded software that's needed for a specific purpose. And depending on the firm, sometimes they'll have the staffing to build it. Sometimes that means I build it. Sometimes that means that it's outsourced to someone or a software company who has a great solution for it. So, I find that's just an area where there isn't a ton of expertise necessarily within a law firm, but it's something, especially in, let's say, the past 5 years, that firms are really having to adapt and become more tech savvy. Now, I've been doing this, for the past 15, 17 years. So it's always been my language, but recently it's become the language of firms as we move into a more virtual or technological era. And so, with that in mind, I think it allows me to add value to the firms that I'm working with because they may not know how to approach those kind of problems. And I have those two sides, like you were saying, sort of the hard skills, the technical skills, the finance, the revenue generation, and then also the softer side of operations and HR and people and culture. And I think, people who know me know that I've always had sort of the soft side, the warm heart sort of thing, just as a personality trait. But it's also something that I learned as I went along. I had some really great mentors early on in my career who taught me a lot about people and, just the principles that allow you to optimize performance there. And so, credit to all of the people on my journey as well, because I really became expert as I am today by doing and by experiencing life within a large law firm, a small law firm, and pulling those cultures together and seeing, what works. And every firm's a little different too. So it takes a little bit of management instinct or judgment to be able to say, this is what this particular organization needs and could optimize and benefit from.
I think that word you use there, optimize, I think that often is mentioned by operators, right? It's like that
Yeah.
efficiency, the optimization element where it's like, okay, how do I make what the idea of what we want to do a reality, right? So bringing in that visionary's vision, but also being able to go, okay, well, how do we make things more efficient, more optimized? How can we then, by doing so, we are able to scale what we're able to do. We have more time, more resources to be able to do what we're trying to do. And so it's marrying and bridging that gap between founder and actual day-to-day operations. So I think it's really interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about your journey and a bit more about your background. You've helped small firms double and triple their revenue. What are the most common operational bottlenecks that prevent law firms from scaling?
Yeah, good question. And when you talk about scaling, there are a few different areas to scale. So, certainly there's revenue generation, scaling the revenue, scaling profit. There's also growth of headcount. Does the organization want to become larger and have more people, more attorneys that work there, which in turn can generate revenue? Or do they want to expand their geographic footprint? Do they have a vision to be all over the country or the region? And sometimes it's all three. So, there's no right or wrong answer there, but those three things are very much connected. And, one thing that I have found is important as a foundation is to figure out which of or what combination of those things are the primary goals of the founder of the firm and what is the vision for growth. And, I think as law firm professionals, we are asked, especially these days, to do more with less. And that is how I think I came into this process optimization and, Six Sigma principles, legal project management. I have certifications in both because I realized I needed to know how to optimize and how to use what I had to make the best possible outcomes. And that will help firms to scale. So by creating a system that really that minimizes, let's say, waste and that has the most efficiency possible, that manages projects so that they move forward and really reach tangible results, have milestones, have checkpoints weekly, monthly, where things are truly moving forward. Those are ways to ensure that the long-term outcome of revenue growth, of scaling the organization, of however the firm or the founder of the firm envisions that growth to make sure that those things are happening. Because really, when you break it down, steps need to be made every day in order to grow the organization. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens in incremental, small bites at a time that happen every day and really takes the buy-in of the organization. And that's where culture comes in too, because if people are not rowing in the same direction, if they're not aligned, if they don't agree with the vision, then it's going to be a lot harder to move it forward.
Mm. I want to jump on that point that you mentioned there in terms of culture and actually getting that buy-in, right? How do you maintain firm identity and culture during, I guess, rapid growth phases or rapid hiring phases or recruitment phases? How do you maintain that? Obviously, new faces are coming in. Things are changing. Some people are upset. Some people are worried. Some people are whatever. So how do you maintain that?
Yes. And one gap that I see quite often, and I have, whether I was within law firms or advising them, is communication. There may be the perception that communication is happening, but
Mm.
oftentimes there is a gap there, or it is lacking, or not everyone is informed on what's going on. And certainly there's levels to that. Perhaps your associate attorney doesn't know every intricacy of your growth plan, but communicating the right things at the right time is key to keeping people engaged and feeling that they're informed and understand where the firm is going, because that's really part of it. Is you can't row in the same direction if you haven't set that direction. You have to have the flag somewhere that you're working towards, and that can happen from the most entry level administrative staff all the way up to the partner level, just with a different spin depending. And I think there's some conversations as you grow and scale that are key. Like if someone is sort of a leader in a particular geographic market or something, and then someone else is coming in laterally, there's a key conversation that has to happen there as far as how do those two people or groups fit together and how is that going to grow the firm. I think sometimes lawyers, I've heard, just studies that they're highly skeptical. And, I think to a certain extent, they may feel threatened by growth at certain aspects, although ultimately it's a good thing because particularly if they are a partner or a shareholder in the organization, it will give them more revenue in turn. But it's talking through that, making sure, and not everyone is business savvy, let's say. So making sure that people see the long-term vision and see if we take steps 1, 2, and 3, then we will reach this result, which will be more lucrative or which will grow our organization so we have resources we don't have today. Or if we change even this process, it will allow us to scale or bring in this business development professional. It will grow our book of business. And it may seem scary to share that initial client conversation with someone, but in reality, they can help bring it across the finish line. So there's a lot of conversation like that happens as you scale. And depending on the firm, a lot of just regular updates, whether that's team meetings or utilizing a virtual platform like Slack or Teams to really keep people updated, to have things to even refer back to as simple as the billing schedule for the firm or things like that. It's having people understand where to go for resources. Maybe they have a firm intranet, and really making sure that as things develop, they're communicated and no one feels surprised. Sometimes you have to meet and discuss things as well that are changes and may feel heavy at first, but then after talking them out with the group, they realize, okay, yes, this does make sense now that we've explained it. We've talked through the concerns. I think sometimes you have to have the hard conversations to preserve the culture and to develop that trust where you can move forward.
I love what you just said there in the hard conversations and everything you said in describing the issues of culture that can develop is it's really around communication, right? And being able to
Mhm.
communicate consistently, coherently, articulate exactly what you're trying to achieve. And it's all about providing clarity to the team members and the organization through consistent communication. So I think it's really interesting you mentioned that, because whether it's conversations, whether it's a virtual platform, whether it's email, a blanket email being sent out, whatever it might be, so long as individuals, team members feel like they know what's happening and they're not in the dark and they know what the changes are, they're more likely to be adoption towards the culture, right? So I think that's really interesting. I think with culture, especially now, there's a two-letter word out there that's changing cultures in many organizations at the moment. And that two-letter word starts with an A and ends with an I, right? As someone who can speak both languages of technical and legal, how do you approach introducing AI tools to law firms and law firm partners who might be resistant to change?
Yes, and I will say the mindset on AI does vary quite a bit depending on the firm. Some founders or partner groups are really open to embracing it. I've seen firms who even have departments particular for that so that they can engage in the proper risk management and investigation that's required to really fully implement something like that. And then there are firms who are very much hands off, really hesitant to adopt. And a lot of firms fall somewhere in the middle, of course. And so, I think to introduce those tools, there are so many versions or pieces of AI. Some of them feel very safe, like in a document management system, they may have a tool which summarizes the document and it's proprietary. The company who creates the system has said, this is not something that's going out into the public internet. It's within your account. So those things I think are easier to adopt for those who may be a little hesitant. There's legal research software that have similar capabilities as well. And so, just sometimes easing people into something like that can be helpful. And then, I think it's important to have policy in place. And that's why some of these larger firms do have groups or departments that are dedicated to this, including some attorneys who are focused on practicing in this new area, because there's a difference between using it to help you brainstorm a presentation versus using it to write legal argument. And, the accuracy does come into question, especially with ChatGPT, those public type of platforms. And I do think you have to be careful about that. It is a reality that sometimes it isn't completely spot on. And that's where there have to be some guardrails around that of, okay, if we are utilizing it in a certain way per the bar rules or ethical rules, how are we charging clients for that? Are they benefiting from our use of AI through a lower cost? That could be a win-win, depending on how much time it takes us to use it. Are we verifying for the accuracy of the content? That's going to be important. There have been many case law decisions that have said ultimately the liability for any inaccurate information falls back on the attorneys who have drafted that. And so, firms are thinking about all of those things, and it's a complex topic because they want to make the right decisions. And firms by nature, I think, are a bit risk adverse because it's in their best interest to be that way. And so sometimes it's trying out tools that are safer and then designing policy around some of the broader uses and seeing where the comfort level lies. And again, different firms are different. There's some firms that have sort of those AI chatbot type of things that attend every meeting as a virtual assistant. And then there's other firms who don't want AI involved in anything. So, it is really a spectrum or a scale. And, I think ultimately all firms will move in that direction because that's the way the world is moving. But there is a balance there between sort of the human aspect, the mind, the training of an attorney, and what AI can do to supplement that rather than replace it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you touched on some really great points, primarily surrounding the fact that firms and companies are going to have to adopt it. It's just a case of when rather than if. But
Yeah.
it's also a case of being a little bit more cautious with your approach, because especially something like within law and legal solutions, primarily there's a lot of jeopardy involved if you get it wrong, right? And not utilizing, and as you mentioned, ChatGPT and those types of external, more public large language models, AI, they don't necessarily always hit the point correctly, right? And so it's very important to get it right the first time round. With your own experience of helping organizations, law firms implement AI, what are the most practical AI applications you're seeing work well in law firms right now?
Yeah, one thing that is huge, and there's several different spins on this, is agentic AI. So, meaning utilizing it for routine tasks, whether that's combing through a particular email box or setting up new matters in their systems. There's a lot of things there that historically were very labor intensive, and it would really slow down the process. Let's say a lateral group comes in and you have 500 matters to open. Do you have historically your intake person typing it in, or do you have an AI agentic chat bot type of thing who can be instructed and then turns that around at a speed that is just almost unfathomable? It can be 30 seconds and all of those matters have been entered. And so, I think that's almost shocking to law firm leaders initially to realize that something can happen that quickly. And, it's not necessarily, I think people do get a little scared of this person has worked with the firm for 15 years. We don't want to replace them with a robot. But it's really not that either, because you still need that person for quality control purposes. It's just that their job function has changed and elevated. And when you have that conversation correctly, I think there's a lot of buy-in for that, even for those people who maybe they don't have to type in 500 things now. Maybe they're now reviewing it and training the agentic AI to do it better. So, there's some great kind of administrative operational back end uses for it that can be really, really powerful. And then, another thing that I've seen on the marketing side is you can really leverage even the public platforms, give it enough content and information that it understands the firm's voice and can really create content more quickly to market the firm, to create RFPs or pitches or presentations even. And some integrate. So you could have Copilot creating a PowerPoint for you that would, for most people, at least by the time you've formatted it, it'll do all that for you. And it just saves so much time.
Yeah.
So, those types of things. And then, I think there is power in the legal research, the document summaries. Those things are huge too. Even the meeting summaries, most of those AI note takers are pretty good for the most part. I had one firm owner who tried out about 4 of them and had them sort of follow him around for a while, and some were better than others, but by and large, they really did capture most of the action items. So it keeps accountability there too. So again, it really depends on the firm, but there's a lot of practical cases to support the legal operation from an administrative standpoint. And then I think now we're starting to dabble in how can it help us with the legal research while still having some risk management there in place.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned agentic AI, right? Because it's only a handful of times have I've actually spoken about it on this podcast, primarily because it's still early days in the way it's being developed, but the rate at which it's developing is incredible. And what you mentioned there with regards to it being able to do something in what might have taken hours in 30 seconds, right? It reminds me, when you look at law firms, so you think of, okay, well, you used to have to handwrite things, then you started getting the printer, or it was fax machines turned into email, right? And it was like those email is as part of every single law firm as any other organization, right? Same with printing. And even now, printing with less paper, with printing less, right? So the evolution is there, and the history of evolution is there. And this is just one of those things where it goes, well, it will be implemented in everything because it simply makes you more efficient operationally and statistically in every organization. So there's a real advantage to some of these tools out there if used correctly, if you get the right people into, or have the right people in your organization that are specifically looking for these competitive advantages, let's say. And right now it's a competitive advantage. In 20 years' time, everyone will have it, right? But right now, the quicker you get on it, the more of an advantage you have in the competitive market. So I think that's true for what we're saying. Okay, so in this segment of the podcast, we like to call the Entrepreneur's Room. And that's a series of questions we like to ask all of our guests to give our viewers and listeners an opportunity to understand how business owners and business leaders think and operate when they run their businesses. So first question I'd like to ask at this stage of the podcast is, how are you currently spending your days as a leader of the business?
Yeah, great question. So, I think as an entrepreneur, it's important to recognize that you get out of it what you put into it. And so if you're not really 100% all in, then you're not going to see the results that you would like to see. And I think knowing that as you begin, whether you are an attorney opening a law firm or a consultant or an advisor or really anything, is knowing your own work ethic and knowing that you believe in yourself and the ceiling of effort that you can provide. So, one thing that I think is important to me is that there's some balance to that, in the sense that most of the time, certainly I have client demands, but I can also make my own schedule to a certain extent, that I'm the one kind of driving the timing of most things. And so I appreciate that, because there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. Sometimes there are things that I'm doing. I'm a night owl, so there's things that I'm doing, 9 o'clock at night when it's all quiet and peaceful at my home. And that's my focus time, or my creative time, I guess, to really kind of plan and be strategic and work on some more intensive projects. And then, most of my days, I have meetings or presentations or consultations with potential clients or conversations about opportunities. So, there's a lot of different things, but I would say particularly in today's world, I have people who are nowhere near me geographically who I work with or correspond with on a daily basis. So, a lot of virtual meeting time, and that may depend on the individual. Some people may be more tailored towards in person. I kind of do both, but, to really just optimize and make the most of your time, I think is important, and to really commit to putting in the effort to start and scale your own business while, in my case, helping firms to do the same.
It's really interesting when I ask this question, because there's an element of growing the business, right, and working on the business. But a lot of the time, especially as entrepreneurs, we find ourselves working in the business, because a lot of growth can come from happy clients, referrals, word of mouth, that type of stuff. But working on the business also allows you, and as a COO, you would know, like, on the business is just as important, getting the operations right, getting the efficiencies right, but also getting sales and marketing right, and getting it dialed in, and getting those conversations coming in on a consistent basis. So always interesting to hear that. As a leader of the business, what are the most important metrics to you?
Yeah, and I mean, I think certainly revenue is one of them, because you want the business to be successful, and it provides you with a platform to continue to grow and continue to contribute what you are to your clients. And, one thing that is important to me is the fact that I can help multiple people. It's not just one organization, but I'm able to provide my expertise to multiple. And then I think it's also important to know your own limits, to say, okay, maybe I'm not the premier person to do my own business development. Maybe there's someone who can help me with that. I think that it's important to know when to bring in good people and use your resources, so that while you're working on the business, you're working on it efficiently. And, there's a lot that I did operationally when I started my business. I had to set up a file structure. I had to set up computers, all of the things that I would do for a firm or another organization. I also had to do for myself. Those things come pretty easily to me. So it was simple in that sense, but there's also things where I know I need a real expert. So making sure that I'm using my time well and generating the most client impact out of it and business impact out of it, and pulling in other resources when I need to.
Yeah, you mentioned a really great point there, and it's knowing your strengths. And this is why I always say to anyone who will listen, really, one of my favorite things to say is leaning into the strengths that you have, and what your strengths are, right? And not everyone is great at everything, and especially with business, especially with growing a business, one of the key things is there will always be someone else better at that other thing than you are doing that. And you spending time doing that is taking away time from you doing what you do best at, right? And if you're able to then remove all those little things that are draining you and do the thing that you're great at most naturally, then you're able to focus all of your energy into something that you love, that gives you energy, and then you can bring in the right people for the right areas, and then everything just has a positive snowball effect. That's what I like to say. Obviously, theoretically, it sounds better, but in practice, like with everything, it's a little bit more difficult to put into place, but the concepts are there, right?
Absolutely.
So in terms of then growing the business, how are you currently growing the business? What kind of business development activities are you doing to grow the business?
Yeah, so a lot of, just online marketing. And frankly, starting out, I had a lot of referrals. So that was helpful too, because I was well connected within the industry already. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the case for someone starting out, but it was helpful to me because I was able to establish a base of business that would allow me to focus on propelling the rest of it forward. And I do think there's that aspect of doing what brings you the happiness, doing what you love, playing to your strengths, and being able to say, the more time I spend with clients, that's my sweet spot, that's my impact. And so, I would say I probably don't market as much as I could. And that's where I say, I probably need more expertise in that area, which I've been looking at. But, I think it's okay because everyone has those things that they're really strong at or are not. And, for me, I just make sure that I'm doing something all the time, whether that's some active LinkedIn posting or just activity, or, currently I'm working with a friend and colleague on designing our website and launching that in a better way. So making sure that those activities are always happening, even if it's not maybe your favorite area, and really generating that brand awareness like I do. I realized, I think recently in talking with some business development and marketing type of people about this, that maybe I was doing more than I thought because I do a lot of conferences or speaking engagements or presentations or webinars. There's an association of legal administrators who are law firm managers or leaders. And so, that's one great organization. There's also sort of the attorney side, different organizations for different practice areas and things of that nature. So, being visible and creating that awareness. And, that's easier for me than working on SEO or something. Not that I can't do that, but it doesn't bring me the joy that sharing knowledge does. So, I think that's my spin on business development is to really demonstrate what my depth of knowledge is and how I can contribute that to firms by sort of giving them a preview of what that could look like or some of the expertise that I could share. And that's worked for me. I think everyone is different, and it's important to be authentic to yourself as you're growing so that you can see that and people can tell the difference whether you have your armor on and you're pretending to be someone or whether it's you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I love that you said that in terms of like the webinars, the knowledge share and that area, because what we call that internally education-based marketing, right? You educate the market on exactly what you do, expert-led, exactly what you've done. And people can get an affinity towards you based off of your story, based off of the knowledge and expertise that you're able to share in those moments, and really being able to implement that in all areas gives you a great opportunity. But it sounds like your experience in law firms has put you, instead of being able to go to conferences and be doing presentations and comfortably handle those kinds of things, whereas others might find SEO more interesting or easy to do behind a computer, but they don't have to get in front of 10, 15, 20, 50 people and have to tell them about something, right? So it's always interesting to know the strength of each individual.
Yeah. And I describe myself too as a learner. I'm always trying to read something or improve my own knowledge. And so I think that strategy also resonates with me. Like that's something that I would want to see. And in fact, I've gone to other people's presentations if they have more knowledge on a topic than I do. And a lot of times that sparks the conversation too. So there's some cross referral, or, I do have partnerships with software companies as well, because I do speak that tech side. So, there's a lot of different avenues that unfold when you're true to yourself and doing that educational marketing.
Absolutely, absolutely. In terms of then, obviously you've had a really great career in the legal section and also started your own company and your own business. What have you tried before? What didn't work? What were the biggest lessons that you can maybe share today with us and our viewers and listeners?
I think one pitfall that I have fallen into at certain points is being so focused, particularly when I was within a firm, being so focused on doing the role that I wasn't also connecting with others in the community. Like, I think that even if you are within one firm, that's very important. And I sort of realized about a year or so ago that that's something I want to be very intentional about always doing, because the more you're interfacing with similarly knowledgeable colleagues or people who have different expertise that complements yours, the more that you are improving yourself and what you have to offer as well. And so, there were times where I didn't necessarily feel that I had a large network, which wasn't entirely true, but I hadn't fostered it. I hadn't kept up with those connections in the ways that I should have. And so that's something that, I'm trying to be more intentional about. And I think it is more important when you are driving your own client success as well. And then, I think really balancing competing priorities can be a challenge at times. If you're within a firm, there may be different groups of people or different areas of the business that have different priorities or viewpoints on certain things. And so making sure that you are very clear on how those pieces fit together. There are times law firms can be complex, and there are times where I've found that there was sort of disagreement between different areas, and I've had to kind of pull those things back together. So that was a lesson learned for me of, trying to keep that alignment. And again, it goes back to communication and culture too, but just also having sort of aspects of unity that you're thinking about proactively and moving forward. And I think it's the same if I'm consulting with an organization. And sometimes it's easier to see from the outside because I'm sort of the unbiased participant at that point. So, I think that's just really key to make sure that all of the right considerations are accounted for within sort of the people and culture side, as well as, how much revenue are we making? How many billable hours do we have? So, just that balance there is really important.
I love it. I love it. And I think that's a great place to end the podcast. Today's been a really great conversation. And I like to end every single podcast with the same question, right? And
Okay.
that is, if you had a magic wand you could wave to solve one business problem, what would that be?
Interesting question. Well, I think it would really be that to understand the investment in certain resources to drive certain outcomes. And that varies a lot from firm to firm. Some firms are very tied into investing in the right tools, whether that's an AI software or an enterprise level application or leadership development seminars or understanding sometimes that it takes some money to make money in certain investments. And then there are other firms who are very much closed to that and really want to push doing more with what is already there or with less. And so if I could sort of make it clear, and I do often end up sort of demonstrating or mapping out what the ROI would be of some of these projects, but I think that there's a hesitancy there in the legal world to invest in certain aspects of business sometimes. And if I could sort of paint that picture or have everyone have a full understanding of where that investment leads and what the ROI is on that investment, then I think firms as a whole would really get so much farther. Because whether you're talking about succession planning, I gave a webinar on that yesterday for the ALA, or whether you are speaking about software and growth, the efficiency is only there if you're optimized. And sometimes it takes investment to do that. So if I could magically have everyone understand that off the bat and really embrace it without skepticism, that would be huge and would certainly make every operations professional's job a lot easier.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think that's such an interesting. That's the first time we've got that, but I think I can see it. So it really does align with the theme of today, with operations, and as you said, with every operations professional. Melissa, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. You've been a phenomenal guest, and thank you so much for your insights today. For all those out there that might want to reach out to you, speak to you, where would they go? How would they find you?
Yes, absolutely. So they can certainly find me on LinkedIn under my name, Melissa Hansel, or under Outlook Advisory Group. Or you can certainly also email us directly. Our email is hello@outlookadvisorygroup.com. So feel free to reach out there as well, and our team will get back to you, and we'd love to speak with you further.
Fantastic. I will put everything in the description below. But Melissa, again, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for sharing your time today.
Thank you, and it was great to be here.
Awesome.